Because that night, as Meghan's voice echoed words about empathy and truth, Harry's silence became the loudest thing in the room. His body language wasn't rebellion. It was revelation. The truth was spilling out quietly, not through words, but through gestures, through distance, through an eye roll that said what his heart had been whispering for years. But that wasn't the end of it. Because what happened after the speech, when the cameras stopped rolling, when the applause faded, when the public couldn't see anymore, revealed the full weight of what that night truly meant. According to insiders, what began as a simple miscommunication between a couple on stage turned into something much bigger backstage. A conversation that wasn't supposed to happen. A moment that wasn't supposed to be heard. A confession that could not be taken back. And it all started the second the applause stopped. What came next wasn't caught on camera, but it changed everything. And no one, not even the organizers, saw it coming. The applause faded like a dying echo, swallowed by the velvet curtains that separated the stage from the backstage corridor. Meghan and Harry had just stepped off the platform, her face still glowing for the cameras, his eyes still clouded from the glare. But as soon as they were out of sight, everything changed. Gone was the charm. Gone was the polished composure. In its place was silence, thick, heavy, electric. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Meghan adjusted her gown. Her assistant hurried to hold the train, and Harry stood still, staring at the ground. The only sound was the muffled hum of the audience still clapping in the hall behind them. Then Meghan broke the silence. "Well," she said, forcing a quick exhale that sounded like relief disguised as triumph. "That went beautifully." Harry didn't answer. He kept his hands in his pockets, shoulders tense, his expression unreadable. Meghan turned toward him, her voice soft but edged. "You could have smiled more," she murmured. That sentence, simple as it was, hit like a spark in gasoline. Harry looked up. "I did smile," he said quietly. "Plenty." But the tone wasn't defensive. It was tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of pretending. She frowned, brushing a strand of hair back into place. "You looked distracted," she added. "People notice those things." That's when Harry finally met her eyes. "People notice everything," he said. "That's the problem." It wasn't an argument yet. Not exactly. But there was tension in the air, the kind that comes from words left unsaid for too long. Behind them, staff members tried to look busy, pretending not to hear. But they heard every word. A stylist tugged nervously at a garment bag. A PR handler cleared her throat, then quietly slipped out of the room. No one wanted to be caught between them. Meghan took a deep breath, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just focus on the press photos," she said briskly. "The coverage will be positive. It always is." Harry muttered, "Yeah, until it isn't." The words were quiet, but sharp, a dagger wrapped in exhaustion. And right then, for the first time that evening, Meghan's mask cracked. Her posture stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice lower now, not angry yet, but controlled. Harry shook his head. "Nothing. Forget it." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Because the truth was, that eye roll, that single, involuntary expression, had already gone viral. Within minutes of leaving the stage, phones backstage began buzzing. Clips were circulating online. Editors were cutting slow-motion loops. Someone from the media pit had already texted a journalist. "Harry looks miserable." The PR team knew, and they were panicking. One assistant walked briskly toward Meghan's handler, whispering, "We might have an issue." The reactions already trending. Meghan overheard it. She turned sharply. "Trending? What reaction?" The assistant hesitated. "The camera caught something. When you started speaking about shared compassion." Harry froze. Meghan's eyes darted toward him. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice rising. Not loud enough for a scene, but enough to slice through the tension. "I didn't do anything," Harry said, his tone defensive now. "I blinked." "It wasn't a blink, apparently," the assistant muttered. "It looks like an eye roll." Meghan's mouth parted slightly, half disbelief, half dread. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Meghan laughed, a brittle, disbelieving sound. "Oh, for God's sake," she said, waving a hand. "People will read anything into anything. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not to her. And not to him. Because Harry wasn't laughing. His expression said it all, a mixture of frustration and resignation. "You see?" he murmured, looking directly at her. "This is exactly what I mean." Every little thing becomes a headline. Meghan shot back. Then maybe stop giving them reasons. That line hung in the air like smoke. A heavy silence followed. One of the organizers, standing awkwardly near the exit curtain, quietly slipped away. No one wanted to be near this moment, but everyone could feel it. Harry turned away, running a hand through his hair. "You think I want this?" he said, voice low but trembling slightly. "You think I enjoy every expression I make being dissected by people who've never met us?" Meghan crossed her arms. "You knew what this was when we started, Harry. You can't act surprised now." He looked at her, really looked at her, and there it was again. That same frustration that flashed across his face on stage. The kind that comes from someone who's been holding back for too long. "I knew what it was supposed to be," he said quietly. "Not what it's become." That stopped her. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, as if remembering where they were, Meghan straightened her posture, her voice softening into PR mode. "Let's not do this here," she said smoothly. "Not tonight." But Harry wasn't in the mood for control anymore. "Right," he said flatly. "Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Never. Just smile and play along, yeah?" It wasn't shouted. It wasn't cruel. But it cut through her perfectly composed demeanor like glass through silk. And the worst part? A few people backstage did hear it. One event organizer later confided to a friend. It was uncomfortable. You could tell this wasn't a new fight. It was an old one finally bubbling up in public. Minutes later, Meghan's aide reappeared with her phone. "We need to get ahead of this," she said quietly. "A few journalists are already posting the clip." Meghan sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Tell them it's nothing, that Harry was reacting to something off camera. Maybe a light or someone coughing. Make it sound harmless." Harry chuckled under his breath, a dark, hollow sound. "A light? Sure," he said, walking away toward the lounge. "Let's blame the lighting again." Meghan called after him, "Harry," but he didn't turn around. That was the last anyone saw of him for nearly 20 minutes. He disappeared into a quiet corridor leading to the VIP exit, trailed by one security guard who looked like he'd rather be invisible. Meghan, meanwhile, composed herself instantly. By the time she stepped into the press room, the transformation was seamless, smiling, gracious, effortlessly poised. The cameras flashed. The reporters cheered. No one would have guessed that just minutes earlier, her husband had walked away mid-conversation. But behind that calm surface, something had cracked. Because as polished as Meghan was, she knew the pattern. She'd seen it before. The whispers that start small and snowball into narratives you can't control. The way one clip, one expression, one look can rewrite an entire reputation overnight. She wasn't about to let that happen again. Her team immediately drafted a short statement for distribution. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were deeply honored to receive the humanitarian award. Any online speculation about body language or expressions during the event is entirely unfounded. Crisis management, swift, strategic, rehearsed. But it was already too late. By the time the statement went live, TikTok had flooded with edits. Headlines had gone viral. The moment had escaped their control. And Harry? He was gone. According to a driver stationed outside, Harry had stepped into the couple's car early, alone. He sat in the back seat, looking out the tinted window, saying nothing. When the driver asked if he should wait for Meghan, Harry simply said, "She'll find her way." Inside the venue, Meghan was still working the room, greeting donors, posing for final photos, her smile never slipping once. But her eyes, sharp, distant, gave her away. She knew. The story had already been written. The irony was cruel. The gala celebrating mental wellness had exposed the emotional fracture between its most famous guests. And somewhere in that quiet car outside, Harry knew it too. He wasn't angry anymore. Just numb. It wasn't the kind of exhaustion that sleep fixes. It was something deeper, a fatigue that comes from pretending to belong in a life that no longer feels like your own. When Meghan finally joined him 40 minutes later, sliding into the car beside him, neither spoke. The flash of paparazzi bulbs painted their faces in fleeting bursts of white light. Through the window, it looked like unity. Two silhouettes side by side, driving off into the New York night. But inside that car, silence filled every inch of space between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night, that silence, that tension, would follow them home. And soon, it would begin unraveling everything they had worked so hard to preserve. Because the footage wasn't just viral now. It was cultural currency. It was proof of something everyone suspected, but no one dared say aloud. And when the palace saw it, when the headlines reached London, things would never be the same. What happened next wasn't a PR fix. It wasn't a story you could spin. It was family. It was consequence. It was history repeating itself in a way Harry had feared for years. But before the palace could react, another shockwave hit. One that came not from the media, but from within Harry's own circle. A phone call, a warning, and a reminder that in the royal world, every gesture, even an eye roll, carries a price. And the price this time would be heavier than either of them expected. The most uncomfortable truth of the night wasn't on stage. It was baked into the plaque itself. Humanitarians of the Year. Sounds unimpeachable, right? Polished. Safe. Untouchable. Like armor you can wear against criticism. But titles can be mirrors, too. And sometimes they show the one thing no one wants to see. Here's the hook. The gala's entire ethos is radical honesty about what we feel but don't say. Yet the couple crowned that night arrived rehearsed to the syllable, lacquered in perfection, and terrified of the one thing the organization preaches. Unfiltered truth. That disconnect hummed through the room like feedback in a sound system. You could feel it in your molars. Let's step into the lobby just before the show. The donor wall glows, a constellation of names etched in brass. Staffers thread through the crowd with iPads, the modern collection plate. Everyone is here for something noble, fund programs, open access, destigmatize pain. But the room also pulses with another currency, proximity. Cameras find famous faces, and famous faces pretend not to notice. It's philanthropy as theater, and the ticket price is eye contact. The organization's mission is straightforward. Make talking about your inner life normal. Practical. Life-saving. Their programs connect people to care, push back on shame, and platform conversations that used to happen only behind locked doors. It is good work, real work. No punchline there. So why did the room feel split, like a stage set built over a fault line? Because the cause was humility, but the moment was spectacle. The cause was listening, but the night was broadcast. The cause was, tell the messy truth, but the speeches were sanded to a high gloss. And when the camera cut to Harry at precisely the wrong, or right, second, the gloss cracked. That's the irony. Not that they accepted an award. Not that they support a cause. The irony is that Project Healthy Minds throws a lifeline to people drowning in performance. Yet the evening crowned a performance that was drowning the people inside it. Let's break the room into 3 quiet worlds. World 1, the founders and clinicians. You can spot them by the way they listen, still, direct, unblinking. They've sat in rooms where the only light is the small bravery of, I'm not okay. They don't clap the loudest, they don't need to. Their applause is steady, grateful, practical. They want funding to keep the doors open and lines staffed. Their metric is lives touched, not headlines earned. World 2, the donors and corporate partners. They believe in the mission and are proud to be seen believing in it. They speak fluent keynote. They know how to convert a personal story into a slide with bullet points and a budget line. Their metric is scale, reach, adoption, impact reports. Necessary? Absolutely. Clinical empathy needs a ledger. They're the bridge between ideals and payroll. World 3, the orbit of fame. It floats like a satellite with its own gravity, pulling cameras into its tide. In this world, a confession becomes a brand pillar, and a cause becomes a runway. Visibility is both the means and the message. Done right, it raises millions. Done wrong, it looks like packaging pain for clicks. All 3 worlds can coexist. They often do. But balance is delicate, and this night, a single look knocked it off the fulcrum. The script said unity. The room felt fracture. The program said destigmatize, but the air smelled like fear. Fear that an unscripted moment would puncture the story the couple needed more than ever. We are together. We are ascending. We are unshaken. That fear is understandable. Fame is a tide you don't control. It drags you past the buoy line. But mental health doesn't negotiate with optics. It calls your bluff. You can't power smile your way through a panic attack. You can't embargo a sleepless night. So when the MC introduced the award with language about vulnerability and courage, some in the room looked at the couple and saw a paradox wrapped in flashbulbs. 2 people celebrated for openness who could not afford, that night, to be open with each other. Not for 8 minutes. Not even for one. And yet, here comes the complication that keeps this from being a simple takedown. Their impact is real. The money raised that evening will convert into counseling hours and hotline staffing and school-based programs that catch a kid before the fall. Impact lives downstream from imperfection. You do not need a perfect messenger to deliver a life raft. Still, the question lingers like a low note. When advocacy becomes livelihood, when image becomes infrastructure, what happens to the person who can't breathe inside the machinery? What happens to the partner who doesn't want to audition for his own marriage? Picture a small conference room off the main corridor. Fluorescent light. Picture of melting ice water. Name scrawled on a run-of-show printout. This is where the program manager ticks boxes no one claps for. Order of show, mic check, safety notes, volunteer rotations. On the table sits a slim folder marked Impact Update. Inside, numbers that represent real people, wait times shortened, groups expanded, counselors hired. The folder holds the night's soul. Now picture, 3 doors down, a press room staged like a talk show, step and repeat, softbox lighting, a handler with a list of pre-approved questions. Here the narrative gets laminated. Here, the night's soul risks becoming stock footage. And between those rooms, a corridor where a prince and his wife pass like 2 ships, each required to be legendary for different reasons. He was supposed to be the heartline, the soldier who spoke plainly, the son who survived spectacle and walked away from it. She was supposed to be the megaphone, the trained communicator who could scale sincerity into a movement. Together, they were supposed to be unstoppable. Together was the brand. But together is heavy when you're carrying it for the camera. Together needs oxygen. Together needs a back door you can slip out of without being converted into a headline. Here's where the night's paradox tightens. The mission asks all of us to tell the truth before it breaks us. The award asks its recipients to smile as if the truth has already been mastered. The mission says, say you're not okay. The moment says, say it beautifully, on cue, in one take. That clash doesn't make the mission hypocritical. It makes the staging risky. And then there's the meta-irony, the one no one wants to touch. The clip of the eye roll. It will send more traffic to the organization's website than any scripted plea. The algorithm crowns mess. The mess funds the hotline. The hotline saves a life. The chain is ugly and holy at once. Who among us is pure enough to cut it? But if the night minted a single lesson, it's this. You cannot brand your way through your own heartbeat. If you try, your face will confess you. A glance will mutiny. A breath will show the seam. And an 8-second clip will do what 1,000 polished words cannot. Tell on you. Which is why those who truly love the couple, fans, friends, maybe even a cautious sibling across the ocean, wanted something quieter than a crisis statement. They wanted to see a hand squeeze that wasn't for the lens, a shared laugh that wasn't a cue, a crooked, human moment that said, this is hard. We are trying. Instead, the machinery did what machinery does. It spun. It posted. It smoothed. It insisted there was nothing to see while the entire world kept seeing it, replay after replay after replay. And so the award, beautiful in intention, impeccable in cause, became a prism. Tilt it one way, and you see triumph. Funds raised, programs secured, stigma dented. Tilt it the other, and you see the cost. A couple ossifying into a posture they can't hold without splintering. Here's the last image before we turn the page. Later that night, after the after-party emptied into a quiet city and the velvet ropes lay coiled like sleeping snakes, a janitor paused beneath the donor wall to wipe away fingerprints. The brass reflected back a faint, distorted face, his. He chuckled, shook his head, and kept cleaning. The wall gleamed again, good as new. But fingerprints always return. That's how rooms live. Touched, smudged, imperfect, real. And that's how causes live, too. They outlast their galas. They carry on when the step and repeat is rolled into a closet and the headlines chase a newer fire. Real work is what remains when everyone goes home. Which brings us to the next turn in the story, the part where the night's prism casts a beam across the ocean and lands in a palace window. Because while the award was minted in Manhattan, the fallout was measured in London. Phones lit. Aides briefed. A brother paused. What arrived from New York wasn't just a clip. It was a question, sharp enough to cut. If the crown is spectacle and California is spectacle, where does a man go to stop performing? And the first person to force that question into words was not a pundit, not a donor, not a stylist with a list. It was someone who knows the weight of a title and the heat of a spotlight, and who can read his brother's face like a map. He picked up the phone. Was it the stress of the constant scrutiny, the exhaustion of public life, or something deeper, a quiet realization that they were no longer aligned, no longer chasing the same dream? Only they know. But one thing's certain, that single, fleeting gesture changed how the world saw them. From that night onward, the narrative would shift. The perfect partnership was now under a microscope. Every smile would be questioned, every gesture dissected. The Sussexes had always been media masters, controlling when to speak, when to appear, when to stay silent. But the camera had finally caught something they couldn't control: truth. And the truth always finds its way out, no matter how glittering the disguise. So, as the applause faded and the couple exited the stage, Harry's expression softened for just a second. Not angry, not bitter, just lost, like a man realizing he'd become a supporting actor in someone else's story. But what came next, after the cameras stopped flashing, revealed just how deep that realization went. Because once the doors closed behind them and the microphones were turned off, the night took a very different turn, one no one outside that ballroom was supposed to know about. But those who were there say it was the real show, the one that never made it to the stage. And what unfolded behind those velvet curtains would change everything the public thought they knew about the Sussexes. No one saw it coming. It wasn't the speech that told the full story. It was what happened before it. Long before the lights dimmed and the applause echoed through Spring Studios, the cracks were already showing. The night had started with red carpet perfection. Meghan, radiant in a custom Balenciaga gown, smiled for photographers as if she were born for the flash. Every angle was flawless: the sleek bun, the diamond cuff, the confident hand resting on Harry's arm. On the surface, they looked like the embodiment of unity and grace. But insiders at the event tell a very different story. According to multiple reports from production staff and attendees, the atmosphere between Harry and Meghan in the hours leading up to the gala was strained, tense, almost mechanical. She was giving orders, one staffer later revealed. Everything had to be perfect: her lighting, her entrance timing, even the way Harry should stand beside her. But he wasn't engaging. He just nodded quietly, barely speaking. You could feel it, that uneasy silence that hides beneath polished civility. Meghan's team buzzed around her like satellites, adjusting her makeup, repinning her hair, rehearsing her opening line for the 5th time. Harry stood off to the side, glancing at his phone, occasionally tugging at his cufflinks, expression blank. It was a moment frozen in contrast. Meghan, glowing and in control. Harry, restless and disconnected. And that's the irony, because if you only saw the photos, you'd think they were on top of the world. That's how illusion works. It sparkles. It blinds. It hides what's breaking underneath. In fact, several witnesses noticed how Meghan's demeanor changed completely once cameras were nearby. One described it perfectly. Off camera, she was sharp, focused, almost tense. The second the lights hit, she transformed, warm, radiant, full of charm. Like flipping a switch. Harry, meanwhile, didn't seem to have that switch anymore. Gone was the easy grin from his early appearances with Meghan. Gone was the spark that once made him the rebellious royal the world adored. What remained was a quiet man, polite, restrained, and visibly tired of the spotlight. A producer backstage overheard one of Meghan's aides reminding Harry to smile through the speech. He reportedly replied under his breath, "I always do." That one line, "I always do," echoed through the walls of that venue long before the speech began. Because in those 3 words lies the heart of the story. A man who's learned to perform happiness, even when he no longer feels it. Now, imagine the build-up to that moment on stage. Hours earlier, as guests began arriving, the couple's PR team worked overtime, ensuring every camera was positioned for maximum impact. The gala's organizers, thrilled by the publicity, made sure Meghan would have the final speech slot of the evening, the closing act. Symbolically, it was perfect. Meghan Markle, the closing voice of an event about healing. But behind the symbolism, reality was far less poetic. A staff member assigned to their green room described an awkward silence between the two. Meghan reportedly paced, adjusting her speech cards, while Harry sat by the corner table scrolling through his phone. When one aide gently asked if he wanted to rehearse his portion, he shook his head and muttered, "She's got it covered. She's got it covered." It sounds supportive, but anyone who's ever been in a strained partnership knows what that really means. It means, she runs the show. I'm just here to smile. By the time the couple stepped onto the stage, that energy had already solidified. You can see it in the footage, Meghan leading, Harry following. She's glowing, he's guarded. She's present, he's performing. But what caused that disconnect? Sources close to the couple say the tension started days before the event. Apparently, Meghan had been insistent that their joint speech should highlight her advocacy for women and equality, a noble theme, but one Harry reportedly felt disconnected from. He had wanted the speech to focus more on veteran mental health and PTSD awareness, causes deeply personal to him. Their disagreement wasn't explosive, but it was quiet and cutting. It was one of those unspoken arguments, said one insider. He didn't fight her on it, but he didn't agree either. He just checked out. By the night of the gala, that emotional distance was palpable. Observers noticed subtle signs. The lack of eye contact, the absence of small touches they used to share, the brief moment when Meghan reached for Harry's hand before walking on stage, and he didn't immediately respond. Tiny details, fleeting seconds. But that's where the truth hides. Because body language never lies. And if you compare this night to their early post-royal appearances, the Ripple of Hope Award, the Archwell launch, you'll see how the choreography has changed. Back then, they moved in sync. Every look, every gesture felt genuine. Now it feels rehearsed. It's as if they're reciting a script they no longer believe in. Even the way Meghan practiced her lines suggested control. Backstage, one staffer recalled hearing her recite the phrase, "Harry and I believe in empathy as the bridge between isolation and healing," at least 10 times, each with slightly different inflection, searching for the most captivating tone. Harry, by contrast, stayed silent. When asked if he wanted to review his introduction lines, just 2 short sentences, he smiled and said, "No need. It's her night." But was it? Because the event may have been about mental health, but that evening, Meghan wasn't just delivering a speech. She was making a statement, to Hollywood, to the press, to the royals. She wanted to re-establish herself as the voice of compassion and power. And Harry? He looked like a man who wanted to disappear. Even photographers noticed. One Getty photographer later told a tabloid, "It was odd. She looked at the cameras like she was feeding off them. He avoided them like they burned." That dynamic has become increasingly visible over the past year. Everywhere they go, Meghan commands the stage. Harry shrinks from it. She sees cameras as allies. He sees them as ghosts of the past. It's the same cameras that haunted his mother's final moments. The same flashes that turned private pain into public theater. And now, decades later, those same flashes follow his wife. Not as threat, but as opportunity. That's where the disconnect lies. For Meghan, visibility is validation. For Harry, it's trauma. And at the Project Healthy Minds Gala, that clash of philosophies played out not in words, but in silence. Right before Meghan took the stage, a PR assistant whispered, "Remember, smile through the first 30 seconds. Everyone's recording." Meghan nodded. Harry exhaled heavily. A brief pause. Then she turned to him with that practiced grin and said, "Ready?" He didn't answer, just nodded. That was the moment before the moment. The emotional prelude to the eye roll the world would later obsess over. Because you can't fake alignment. Even in still photographs, the truth seeps through. Insiders claim Meghan had instructed the camera crew earlier that day to capture more wide shots of the couple as a unit. But ironically, it was the close-up, the one she didn't plan, that revealed everything. It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes the harder you try to control the narrative, the more the truth forces its way out. As one event coordinator put it bluntly, it's like watching a performance where one actor wants to leave the stage mid-scene. And yet, Harry played his part. Because that's what he's always done. He smiled during interviews he didn't want to give. He stood beside speeches he didn't write. He defended choices he wasn't sure he agreed with. Until, finally, one night, in a flash of frustration or fatigue, or both, he stopped performing for half a second. And the world saw it. That's what makes that tiny gesture so monumental. It wasn't just the product of that evening's tension. It was the result of everything that led up to it. Every moment of compromise. Every forced smile. Every conversation that ended with, let's just stick to the plan. Because by the time Meghan adjusted her microphone and began speaking that night, the story had already been written. Not in words, but in body language, silence, and weary glances. The tension before the speech wasn't an isolated incident. It was the echo of a long, slow drift between two people who once shared a vision, now separated by fame's weight. But here's the haunting part. Those who were there say you could feel it. Not see it. Feel it. That chill in the air when two people smile at each other, but the connection isn't real anymore. That energy of forced warmth, where every touch feels planned, every gesture rehearsed. And in a setting dedicated to authentic emotional wellness, that inauthenticity was impossible to ignore. When Meghan finally took the stage, she delivered her lines with perfect grace. Every word hit. Every camera clicked. Every headline was pre-written in her favor. But as the applause swelled, Harry's eyes told another story. The story of a man who'd quietly realized he no longer belonged in the role he was playing. And that realization would only grow stronger once they left that stage. Because what happened backstage, after the lights dimmed, after the applause faded, after Meghan's triumphant smile, would pull the mask off completely. And it was there, away from the cameras, that the truth finally came out. But what came next was something even their most loyal staff didn't see coming. And it changed the tone of the entire night forever. When Meghan Markle stepped onto that stage, the air changed. You could feel it, that delicate mix of anticipation, performance, and tension so thick it almost pulsed through the lights. The applause was thunderous. The cameras clicked in perfect rhythm. Every lens, every phone, every human eye locked onto her as she smiled and adjusted the microphone. To anyone watching from afar, it was picture perfect. But to those who were there was something else, an undercurrent, a stiffness just beneath the gloss. Harry's posture said it all. He stood a step too far back, his hands clasped in front of him like a man guarding his own discomfort. Meghan, meanwhile, radiated command. She wasn't just speaking, she was performing. Her voice, steady and melodic, carried across the room with practiced warmth. "Thank you, everyone, for this incredible honor," she began. "Harry and I are so deeply humbled to be recognized by Project Healthy Minds for our shared commitment to compassion, healing, and community." Polite applause followed. The audience leaned in. But right then, just as Meghan spoke those words, the cameras caught it. Harry's blink, his slow exhale, the faint tightening of his jaw. And then it happened. The infamous eye roll. Barely a flick of motion, almost invisible in real time, but devastating in playback. The crowd didn't notice. Meghan didn't pause. But the camera never missed. It captured something unscripted, something human, something raw. Because while Meghan's tone was measured, rehearsed, perfect, Harry's expression said everything that couldn't be said out loud. For the first time that night, his face betrayed him. Some in the audience thought it was fatigue. Others thought it was nerves. But to those familiar with the dynamics between them, it looked like frustration, a private emotion slipping through in a very public moment. And what made it even more striking? The line that triggered it. Meghan had just said, "Harry and I have built our lives on the foundation of understanding each other's truths." It was meant to be inspiring, but it was also ironic. Because, according to one insider, that very line had been a point of quiet contention in the days leading up to the gala. Harry had reportedly wanted to change it, to make it about understanding others, not themselves. Meghan, however, insisted it stay as written. She felt the line was symbolic, about their journey, the insider said. Harry thought it sounded self-congratulatory. And when Meghan said it on stage, for the world to hear, Harry's reaction was unfiltered. The faintest roll of his eyes, the subtlest rebellion. The kind that says, "I've had enough." But Meghan carried on flawlessly. Her cadence was deliberate, emotional, expertly modulated. "When we speak about mental health," she continued, "we speak not as experts, but as people who have lived through the pain of misunderstanding, judgment, and isolation. We know what it feels like to be unseen." She paused. The audience nodded, moved. Some even teared up. It was classic Meghan, calculated empathy delivered with cinematic timing. But behind her, Harry looked down. He shifted his weight, glanced briefly at the floor, then back at her. To some, it looked like support. To others, it looked like resignation. And that's the paradox of their dynamic. Two people telling one story but living two different ones. Because for Meghan, the stage is oxygen. For Harry, it's exposure. Every light, every lens, every eye, it takes something out of him. You can see it in the way his shoulders tighten, the way his smile fades the moment the flash goes off. He was supposed to join her halfway through the speech, adding his own words of gratitude. But when the time came, Meghan didn't pause long enough for him to step in. She kept talking, seamlessly, beautifully, but alone. Harry's mic remained silent. And that's when it hit everyone watching. This wasn't a joint speech. This was Meghan's show. Her voice filled the room, her gestures fluid, her energy magnetic. She spoke of healing through visibility, of finding purpose in being heard, of standing strong together through storms. But the irony was almost poetic, because even as she said those words, the man beside her was shrinking into silence. It wasn't just physical distance. It was emotional disconnection. For those who knew Harry, the man who once spoke from the heart about soldiers, trauma, and grief, this new version felt muted, like someone dimmed the light that once burned bright behind his words. A journalist in the audience described it best. She was glowing. He was ghosting. It was like watching a couple in two different movies. Still, Meghan pressed on, determined to deliver the perfect performance. She spoke about authenticity, about being brave enough to tell your story. But as those words echoed, Harry's face hardened. His body language contradicted everything being said. And that's the tragedy, because their message was powerful, necessary, important, but it rang hollow coming from two people who no longer seemed to believe in their own script. Even the audience sensed it. In the front row, a few guests exchanged quick glances. The applause came, but it was hesitant, polite rather than passionate. The energy had shifted. Somewhere between Meghan's first sentence and her closing line, the room's warmth had cooled. One attendee described it later. You could feel the applause get lighter. It wasn't dislike, just discomfort. Like everyone knew something was off, but no one dared name it. When Meghan finally wrapped up her speech with, "Together, we continue to build bridges of compassion," she reached out her hand for Harry. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough for the cameras to catch. Then he took her hand. They turned to the audience, smiling as the room erupted in applause. But even the applause sounded different now, thunderous, but hollow. Like people cheering for a scene, not a couple. The cameras flashed, photographers shouted, "Over here. One more." "Perfect." Harry nodded faintly, his smile thin. That photo, the one that made it to the front page of every major outlet, looked beautiful. The perfect image, Meghan glowing with confidence, Harry beside her, hand in hand. But the truth lived in the seconds between the flashes. Backstage, the contrast was stunning. The moment they stepped behind the curtain, Meghan exhaled, a deep, satisfied breath, and turned to her assistant. "Did it look okay?" she asked. Her voice carried a nervous brightness. Her assistant beamed. "You nailed it, ma'am." "Perfect." Harry said nothing. He handed his award plaque to one of the staff members, muttered something indistinct, and walked toward the private lounge area. A witness described it simply. He looked like someone walking away from noise. Like he needed air. Meghan followed minutes later, chatting animatedly with donors, laughing for the cameras. The two didn't rejoin until it was time for the next photo call. And that's when the whispers began. "Did you see his face? He looked miserable. Was that eye roll real?" The footage replayed on loop backstage, journalists buzzing as if they'd just caught something forbidden. Even some of the event organizers couldn't help but whisper about the tension you could cut with a knife. It was the kind of gossip that spreads faster than wildfire, especially when it involves the world's most dissected couple. But what makes this moment legendary isn't just the awkwardness, it's the symbolism. Because that speech, meant to celebrate unity, became the mirror reflecting division. The message was beautiful, but the delivery revealed the truth. And that's why, in hindsight, people describe that night not as a celebration, but as a turning point. After that moment, something shifted in how both the media and the public viewed them. No longer the radiant symbol of modern love and activism, but something more complex, more fractured, more human. And here's the deeper irony. Project Healthy Minds is an organization built on openness, on confronting what's hidden, on removing masks. Yet the very couple being honored for authenticity spent the night behind the most polished mask of all. That contradiction didn't go unnoticed. In the days that followed, articles popped up questioning whether the Sussexes' public image had grown too polished, too performative. Have Harry and Meghan become what they once ran from? One headline asked. And in that question lies the haunting truth. It happened in a flash. A moment so quick that if you blinked, you might have missed it. But the internet didn't blink. Cameras didn't blink. Millions of viewers around the world caught it. That unmistakable flick of Prince Harry's eyes. That weary, almost involuntary roll that said what words never could. The moment Meghan Markle began her speech at the glittering Project Healthy Minds Gala in New York, the audience erupted in applause. Cameras panned to Harry, standing by her side in his black tuxedo. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. And then, as Meghan adjusted the microphone and began her first line with that perfectly polished smile, his eyes drifted upward, just slightly. Just enough. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But that slight roll wasn't just an expression. It was a revelation. Because for all the glamour, the praise, and the Humanitarians of the Year title bestowed upon them that night, something darker lingered behind those flashing smiles. Something that no PR team could rehearse, no speechwriter could hide, and no stage lighting could blur away. Why did Harry react that way? Was it exhaustion? Frustration? Embarrassment? Or was it something much deeper? A moment of truth slipping through the cracks of a carefully controlled image? And perhaps the real question is, what has been happening behind the scenes between Harry and Meghan that made a single eye roll explode across the world like a silent scream? Because make no mistake, this wasn't just an ordinary gala. This was supposed to be their redemption arc. After months of rumors about fading influence, canceled deals, and an image in crisis, this was the night designed to reassert their power, to remind the world that Harry and Meghan were still the couple who could command a red carpet, dominate a headline, and reshape the narrative with a single speech. But what happens when the mask slips in front of millions? Imagine the scene, chandeliers glowing in gold light, a sea of celebrities clinking champagne glasses, flashbulbs strobing across the polished marble of Spring Studios. It was the kind of night Meghan Markle lived for, a perfect collision of humanitarian prestige and Hollywood glitz. She was radiant, confident, the very image of polished poise as she took the stage in a sleek white gown rumored to be custom-made by Balenciaga. The crowd leaned in, waiting for another flawlessly composed message about compassion, empathy, and healing. But all eyes, all cameras, found their way to one man, Prince Harry. And in that moment, as his wife began her speech, he looked distant, detached, almost painfully out of place. The camera zoomed in. The internet screenshotted. And in a matter of minutes, the clip flooded X, TikTok, and Instagram with one headline after another. Prince Harry's reaction says it all. Did Harry just roll his eyes at Meghan? Trouble behind the smile? What should have been a celebration quickly turned into speculation. But the truth is, this wasn't the first time Harry had worn that expression. Longtime royal watchers will tell you. This was the culmination of years of subtle signals, a pattern that has only become harder to ignore. And that's where this story begins. Because this wasn't just an eye roll. It was the visual echo of every suppressed frustration, every private argument, every moment Harry felt trapped between love and performance. Let's rewind. In the days leading up to the gala, the Sussexes had been preparing for what insiders called a major image reset. Meghan was determined to reclaim her narrative. After the backlash from her Paris Fashion Week appearance, the Balenciaga show, the video of her filming the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, the whispers of insensitivity, this event was meant to draw a clean line between fashion spectacle and purposeful advocacy. The Project Healthy Minds Gala offered the perfect stage, a humanitarian backdrop that aligned with their Archwell mission and their mental health branding. The optics were ideal, a charitable cause, prestigious award, a global platform, and a chance to reframe themselves as serious figures again. But behind the smiles and scripted photo ops, tension was reportedly brewing. According to sources close to the event's organizers, Meghan had been heavily involved in shaping every aspect of the evening, from the seating chart to the speech draft. Harry, on the other hand, seemed increasingly disengaged, described as showing up late to prep sessions and not contributing much beyond presence. He seemed elsewhere, one insider shared. Like he was fulfilling an obligation more than participating. And that's what made that moment, that tiny, telling eye roll, so seismic. It wasn't just a reaction to Meghan's speech. It was the visible tip of an emotional iceberg years in the making. Think about it. This is the same man who once walked away from royal life declaring freedom and authenticity, promising to live a life of purpose outside palace control. Yet here he was again, suited up, standing beside another institution, reciting another narrative that didn't quite feel like his own. And the irony? The event was literally about mental health. The speeches, the honorees, the sponsors, all centered on emotional wellness, honesty, and breaking stigma. And yet, if you looked closely at Harry that night, it was hard not to see the contradiction. His body language said one thing. The award in his hand said another. This was supposed to be a shared victory. But to many watching, it looked like a performance neither of them truly believed in anymore. So why does this moment matter? Because in the celebrity world, image is everything. And when the image cracks, even for a second, the illusion shatters. In the royal world, Harry and Meghan have built an empire around storytelling. Their docuseries, their books, their speeches, all woven around themes of emotional truth, resilience, and partnership. But what happens when that partnership begins to look strained? It's not just gossip. It's the collapse of the very narrative they've been selling for years. And that's why the world can't stop talking about that eye roll. Because deep down, audiences recognize something painfully human in that moment. The exhaustion of a man who said the same lines too many times, who's smiling when he doesn't want to, who's realizing that the story they built together might be cracking under its own weight. And here's the twist. Even as social media dissected the clip, Meghan herself seemed unfazed. After all, she's no stranger to online scrutiny. She smiled through the applause, waved, thanked the audience, and delivered her lines with flawless precision. But to those in the room, something felt off. As one guest whispered later, it was like she was performing for a crowd while he was performing for her, and neither of them believed it anymore. That's where the Real story begins. Because when you trace back their public appearances, from the Invictus Games to the Netflix red carpets, you begin to notice a pattern. The warmth that once defined them has cooled. The synchronized movements are gone. The once shared glances of admiration now replaced by forced smiles and quiet distance. And that night, under the chandeliers of Spring Studios, it all became painfully visible. The Humanitarians of the Year award should have been a crowning moment. But for Harry, it may have been a breaking one. Even as the crowd cheered, the sound must have felt hollow. The applause, empty. Because applause doesn't heal what's real, it only amplifies what's missing. For Meghan, the spotlight has always been part of the message. She thrives in it, shapes it, bends it to her will. For Harry, however, it's become the very thing he once swore to escape. And so, there they stood, one basking in the glow, the other lost in the shadow. That's why the internet froze that frame, why analysts replayed it frame by frame, why tabloids dissected it for days. Because it wasn't about the eye movement itself, it was about everything that moment represented. It was the collision of image and reality. The point where Sussex brand unity became Harry and Meghan, two different stories. And the cruel irony? It all happened during an event meant to celebrate empathy. So, what did Meghan say that sparked such a reaction? Was it a line that hit too close to home? A tone that sounded too rehearsed? Or was it simply the accumulation of everything he's endured? A man tired of pretending everything is fine under the harsh light of celebrity perfection? Maybe the truth lies somewhere between exhaustion and symbolism. Because in the end, that look wasn't just annoyance. It was revelation. The quiet confession of a man who's been silently saying, "I'm done with the performance." But if that was the message behind his eyes, what happens next? Does Harry pull away from joint appearances? Does Meghan double down on her independent spotlight? Does this moment spark the beginning of another public unraveling? One the palace and Hollywood will both be watching with bated breath? Because make no mistake, the royals noticed. The Hollywood power circles noticed. Even their own PR team reportedly scrambled after the footage went viral, trying to redirect the narrative toward lighthearted humor rather than visible frustration. But audiences are smarter now. They sense what's unsaid. They see through rehearsed charm. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous and so powerful. Because while the cameras captured a single expression, the truth behind it could redefine everything the Sussexes have built their post-royal empire on. And as one royal insider allegedly whispered, if you really look into Harry's eyes that night, you can tell he's not rolling them at Meghan. He's rolling them at the life he's found himself trapped in. But if that's true, if that quiet gesture revealed more truth than any speech ever could, then the question isn't about the past anymore. It's about the future. Because after that night, the whispers only grew louder. The footage spread faster, and the silence between them thicker. But what came next, behind closed doors, away from the flashing lights and polished smiles, would change everything. And no one, not even Meghan, saw it coming. The ballroom was buzzing, electric with celebrity energy and designer perfume. Cameras flashed like lightning, chasing the perfect shot. On stage, Meghan Markle stood poised, every inch of her posture rehearsed, every word chosen to perfection. But amid all the glitz and glamour, something in the air felt uneasy. It was supposed to be their big night. The Sussexes had just been named Humanitarians of the Year, the ultimate image reset after months of unfavorable headlines. A celebration of compassion, empathy, and purpose, the kind of event tailor-made for Meghan's narrative of reinvention. But the audience wasn't watching her words. They were watching him. Prince Harry. He stood just a few steps behind her, clapping politely, smiling on cue. But his eyes told a different story. As Meghan began her speech, thanking the organizers of the Project Healthy Minds Gala and praising the importance of open conversations about mental health, Harry's expression stiffened. His jaw tightened. His gaze flicked sideways, then up. And in that moment, caught on camera for the entire world to see, his eyes rolled. A split-second reaction, maybe, but one that would ignite a storm across the globe. Because this wasn't the adoring husband the world once saw at royal events, hanging onto Meghan's every word. This was a man barely holding his composure, his body language screaming what his mouth could never say. And social media noticed instantly. Within minutes of the live stream ending, the clip was already viral. Did Harry just roll his eyes? One user posted on X, attaching a zoomed-in slow-motion version of the footage. Another wrote, "He looks done. Someone get that man out of there." TikTok flooded with side-by-side edits comparing Harry's reaction during Meghan's speech to earlier years when the couple was still fresh, still united. The contrast was staggering. In 2019, Harry had gazed at her with admiration during the Wellchild Awards. In 2020, during a speech for Archewell, he nodded proudly beside her. But in 2025, at the Project Healthy Minds Gala, he looked disenchanted, detached, almost defeated. It was the micro-expression that launched 1,000 think pieces. Psychologists, body language experts, and royal commentators all weighed in. That wasn't just fatigue, one analyst said. That was suppressed frustration breaking through. A microsecond of honesty. The irony was breathtaking. Here they were, being celebrated for advancing conversations around emotional openness and authenticity. Yet the most authentic thing that happened all night wasn't Meghan's speech. It was Harry's involuntary reaction to it. So what exactly did Meghan say in that moment? That's where things get interesting. Just before the eye roll, Meghan had begun a section of her speech emphasizing the couple's shared vision of compassion and understanding. She said, "Harry and I have dedicated our lives to helping others heal, to teaching the world that empathy and listening can bridge any divide." The audience applauded, but the camera, cruelly unflinching, zoomed in on Harry, just as he glanced upward and exhaled sharply. That was it. The second that turned a carefully staged night into a PR nightmare. The reaction wasn't just about what he did. It was about when he did it. Because, to the public, it symbolized something deeper, a disconnect between Meghan's carefully crafted image and Harry's lived reality. Some viewers argued it was exhaustion, that he'd had enough of endless speeches and public appearances. Others insisted it was passive defiance, a quiet rebellion from a man who no longer wanted to play the role of supportive plus one. But to those who followed Harry closely over the years, it wasn't surprising at all. He's never been a natural performer. Even during his time as a royal, Harry preferred sincerity over spectacle, action over applause. He was the soldier, the activist, the down-to-earth royal who never quite fit into the media circus. Meghan, on the other hand, thrived in it, a trained actress, eloquent, commanding, completely at ease before the lens. That difference, subtle at first, has grown impossible to ignore. And on that glittering night in New York, under the unforgiving gaze of dozens of cameras, it reached its breaking point. The reaction from inside the ballroom was just as telling as the one outside. While the crowd continued to clap, a few attendees reportedly exchanged glances. According to a guest seated near the front, it was awkward. Meghan was glowing, but Harry looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. A staff member from the event later told a reporter that backstage whispers began almost immediately. People noticed. You couldn't miss it, they said. It was quick, but the energy between them changed right after. Even during the after-party, the shift was palpable. While Meghan worked the room, greeting executives, posing for photos, flashing her practice smile, Harry lingered by the bar, speaking quietly to a mental health advocate and avoiding cameras altogether. He wasn't angry, just absent. That absence spoke louder than any argument ever could. Because what everyone saw on camera, that fleeting eye roll, was likely the culmination of something that had been brewing long before the gala. Months, maybe even years, of quiet resentment, bottled-up tension, and fatigue from living inside a brand instead of a marriage. It's easy to forget that the Project Healthy Minds Gala wasn't just another event. It came on the heels of a turbulent year for the Sussexes. Their Netflix series had lost steam. Spotify had dropped them. Archewell's funding numbers had raised eyebrows. The couple's public approval ratings were sinking, even among their most loyal fans. This gala, then, was meant to be a turning point, the night to silence critics and remind the world that the Sussexes still mattered. But fate had other plans. Because sometimes, one human moment can undo an entire PR campaign. That's the thing about authenticity. You can't fake it forever. And perhaps, deep down, Harry knew that. He's a man who's seen the cost of image management his entire life. The constant control, the relentless press manipulation, the pain of watching truth traded for headlines. He escaped one system only to find himself in another, cloaked in activism instead of aristocracy. So when Meghan spoke about authentic compassion and living truthfully, it might have struck a chord too close to home. A message meant for the audience, but one that echoed like irony in his own ears. And that, maybe, is what made his eyes lift, his patience slip, and his truth leak through. That's the power of unscripted moments. They pierce through illusion. In those few seconds, millions around the world saw not Prince Harry the humanitarian, but Harry the husband, tired, human, and quietly suffocating under the weight of expectation. Still, Meghan carried on flawlessly. She didn't miss a beat, her tone measured, her delivery crisp. Years of acting experience wrapped her in composure. The crowd, dazzled by her confidence, didn't see what was unraveling beside her. But the internet did. And once the internet decides to dissect, there's no going back. Clips were slowed down, zoomed in, replayed, analyzed frame by frame. Memes followed. Commentators speculated. Theories multiplied. Was it a marital crack? A joke gone wrong? A message to the palace? By morning, Harry Eye Roll was trending globally. And suddenly, a night that was meant to celebrate their unity became a digital referendum on their marriage. It wasn't the first time the couple had faced scrutiny, but this was different. This was visceral, real, a raw glimpse of what their smiles often hide. Because you can stage an event, you can craft a speech, but you can't choreograph the truth. The irony? That night was supposed to prove that Harry and Meghan were still a power duo. Unstoppable, harmonious, unbreakable. Instead, it exposed the quiet dissonance that's been humming between them for years. Behind the applause, you could almost hear it, the soft sound of something cracking. And yet, the moment didn't end there. As Meghan concluded her speech, thanking the Project Healthy Minds team for believing in our shared purpose, Harry stepped forward, hugged her, and kissed her cheek. The gesture was polite, measured, almost mechanical. To the untrained eye, it looked affectionate. But to those watching closely, it felt rehearsed, practiced, like part of a performance. Then, as the crowd rose to their feet in applause, Harry's eyes darted away again, this time toward the floor. That's when Meghan leaned in, whispering something into his ear. Cameras didn't catch the words, but whatever she said made him stiffen slightly before pulling back into a smile for the photographers. That photo, Meghan glowing, Harry smiling stiffly beside her, became the official image plastered across headlines the next morning. But the unspoken tension? It hung in the air long after the lights dimmed. And for the insiders who attended, that moment marked a turning point. Because when you've built an empire on togetherness, even one fracture can send tremors through the foundation.